So the very nature of life is I'm closer to the end than the beginning. And you don't think about that when you're in your teens or your 20s, your 30s, maybe even your 40s. But, once you're a parent and you start getting into your 50s, time becomes a reality, which a lot of people walk the street very slowly. I'm sure you've been at airports or something, and you think, how can people walk so slowly? Because in their mind, they have all the time in the world, where when I walk quickly because I want to get to my destination.
Welcome to the Dubai Talk Show. I'm your host, Lubos Joyce. Today we have a legend, a Formula One driver, David Coulthard, who has been probably one of my idols over the years. This is how I got to follow Formula One over the years. How are you doing, David?
Yeah, all good. Thank you very much. It's always interesting when someone reflects on what are the moments they started watching Formula One, because I guess you were watching when I was racing with Mika and Michael and all of these great drivers. And for me, it was as a teenager watching, Nelson Piquet, Nigel Mansell, Alain Prost, of course, the great Ayrton Senna. So we all have different eras where we start to watch the sport.
Yes, that's amazing. And, I've been trying to reflect the reasons why specifically, let's say, I was interested in you. I was watching at the time when you were in McLaren. And, I don't know, it's just why do you think someone picks up to have some kind of idol? You're a young kid, maybe 10 years old, on what basis do you choose someone? On what basis do you like someone? This is like interesting psychology,
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It could be the color of the car that they were in. It could be a particular race you were watching where they were interviewed. I think we're like that as human beings. I often think, I'm British, I'm Scottish, so I watch British television. And for some reason, I like to watch one particular channel for news in the morning and another channel in the evening. And to be honest, they both tell you the same news, but maybe it's to do with the presenters, maybe it's to do with, I don't know, some tradition. So in the end, I think that you and I are different generations, but we are both fans of Formula One. And that's why I'm still involved in Formula One today and working in television. Obviously I've got the memory of driving, but my job today is something completely different.
Share us a little bit more about your story, when you were younger, why specifically you decided to get involved with Formula, and why not, for example, other type of racing or other type of sports?
Well, I started off with little motocross bikes. So I have an older brother who's 3 years older, and my younger sister was 6 years younger, but we grew up in the countryside in Scotland. So we had some space to have little motorbikes and buggies and things like that. So mobility and motorsport was always kind of part of the family. My dad had raced karts when he was a teenager and had become the Scottish karting champion at 14. But the same year his father died, so his racing stopped, but he had the passion. And I think with him being a fan of motorsport meant that we all kind of grew up watching it. My brother was not interested in the competition, but I was, and my sister was, and we went racing. So yeah, I guess, why not football? Why not rugby? Why not cricket? In the end, I'm happy it was racing because I really enjoyed my career and it was a great education.
So you never thought of playing for Dundee United or anything,
No, when my friends were playing football on weekends, I was away racing. So from a very early age, karting was my passion, and I was getting results and progressing. And that's why when I was 17, I moved to cars.
What has changed in Formula One, from the, comparing the last 2 decades, perhaps? What do you see? What are the changes overall, when it comes to the technical aspects, technology, to the media coverage, when it comes to psychology, that kind of factors?
I think the technology, actually, the thing that binds it together from my era to where we are today is it's always the best technology that is available at that time. So, of course, the cars are much more technologically advanced. They're much more reliable. They have hybrid engines that use energy that didn't exist when I had electric vehicles. since I was a kid. I remember our village, we had an electric milk delivery float. So electric vehicles have been around since the 1800s. But the point being, the best technology that was around in the 60s or the 70s or the 90s or today is still what links Formula One together. I think, of course, the media side is the biggest difference, because previously it was classic newspaper articles and television coverage. Today with the internet, which I'm old enough to remember pre-internet, of course it connects the world in a way that none of us could have imagined in the 80s. So I think the reach of the sport and the ownership vision of Liberty Media to how to exploit that reach to their benefit and to the benefit of the teams is the biggest change. I think the fundamentals of what is Formula One, then that can be defined as the fastest form of closed circuit racing in the world. And until another faster formula comes along, that's the thing that has kept Formula One at the peak of interest amongst the audience for decades.
Talking about media and social media, I think I remember a few years back, Hakkinen, I don't even think he had, Facebook or Instagram or something. It was quite unusual for someone not to be online, like.
Yeah, Mika is a good friend. He lives here in Monaco as well. We do some events together. Yeah, Mika is one of the most naturally talented race drivers, I think, that's ever been in Formula One. I think that he has developed different business interests since he retired, and some of it uses technology and communication. But I think that that's something that's driven him towards being on social media. I don't think as an individual he needs or wants the attention, but I think obviously he's smart enough to realize that from a business point of view, it's very difficult to launch or promote a product if you're not on social media.
So you recently launched your podcast. What was the idea behind it? I guess you wanted to be a little bit more independent. Previously, you've worked several years with a TV channel. So what's the strategy behind that? Are you going to be exclusively for F1?
Well, actually, the correct answer is that I have a shareholding in a production company called Whisper TV, and our former MD, who's now been promoted within the company, Mark Cole, had the idea that we should also have podcasts, and Eddie Jordan, who I'd worked with in BBC and Channel 4 ex-team principal, was keen and available. So it was really just a way to see how it would develop, rather than it being this is our main business, this is what we need to be successful. So Eddie is very experienced and outspoken, and I'm more there to introduce, carry the conversation, and then close the show. But I guess inevitably you are more free to speak on your podcast than maybe you could be on television. One, because of the restrictions in time. Two, because I think you can be more open when you're having a conversation with a buddy than if you're standing in a very formal location talking to a camera. So I think we've done well over 100 recordings now, and it seems to be growing in its popularity, and that's nice to see. And we'll see how that journey continues. Our actual live recordings have slowed down right now because Eddie's undergoing chemotherapy for cancer. And of course, his health is the priority.
Okay. Has your perception of time changed? I've been watching some of your other interviews, and where you said, okay, that we had like 2 seconds to change the car tires, and then you worked on television. They tell you, okay, we have 5 seconds to go live. Now that you're a bit more chill, how is your perception of time?
I think it's one of the great experiences of being involved in a sport like Formula One, or any sport that's really dictated by the stopwatch. Of course, in football, you have 90 minutes. You have, 45 plus extra time, maybe some other time added for injury. But you maybe have a much greater perception of the time you have to be successful or not. Whereas in our sport, you're constantly chasing the lap time in qualifying. It can be 90 seconds or less. A pit stop, if your team give you a 2-second pit stop, this is fantastic. It can win you a Grand Prix. If they do a 2.5-second pit stop, it's still exceptional work, but it can lose you the Grand Prix. So the perception of time is something that I appreciate, because I don't want to waste anyone's time, and I don't want them to waste my time. And as you get older, I'm in my 50s now. I have a 16-year-old son. I'm conscious of the fact that it's a highly unlikely I'm going to live until I'm 108 years old, which would be twice my age. So the very nature of life is I'm closer to the end than the beginning. And you don't think about that when you're in your teens or your 20s, your 30s, maybe even your 40s. But, once you're a parent and you start getting into your 50s, time becomes a reality, which a lot of people walk the street very slowly. I'm sure you've been at airports or something, and you think, how can people walk so slowly? Because in their mind, they have all the time in the world, where when I walk quickly because I want to get to my destination. Even if I have to wait, at least if I'm waiting, I can be doing something productive, which is very difficult to do when you're walking.
What other traits do you think you've learned through your career as a sports person, and how do they help you nowadays? For example, I read that you're quite organized, which means you want to put everything in order. I don't know if you're minimalistic or this is just organized. This is just an example.
Yeah, I think being organized is about being prepared. And so I'm not obsessive in terms of, everything has to be absolutely like this. Of course, if it's put nicely on your desk, then it's easier to, see what you're doing with your eye. But cleanliness is important to me. It doesn't matter if something is old, it can still be clean. And I think how some people consider dropping something on the floor and just leaving it there, it would be impossible for me to do that. If I see rubbish in the street, if it's lots and lots, then of course I'm not going to stop and do someone else's job. But if it's one thing, I'm going to pick it up and put it in the bin, because how much effort does it take? I think little things like that are important to me, to know that you're at least contributing in a positive way and not a negative way.
Do you think that the F1 drivers nowadays, they have similar skills and similar personality traits? I mean, are they like organized, or either somehow distracted by the media or by fame or social media?
I have to imagine that they have a similar characteristic in that they're organized, they're structured. It's very difficult for me to imagine you can rise up through karting into cars and then make your way to Formula One without being not only talented, but being organized. We travel so much that you've got to turn up for your flight on time with your passport. You have to get to your destination, be ready to be in the car. The reliability as a human being is a quality that people will pay for. And it doesn't matter if you're a Formula One driver or if you work in a factory or in a call center. If you turn up on time, do what you're supposed to do, and then leave at the time you're supposed to, you're considered reliable. And reliable people are assets in any business. So I think that sports people, I hear stories. I don't know for sure because I'm not a musician, but I hear stories of musicians who don't turn up at recording sessions, or you hear stories of musicians who don't go on stage at 9 p.m., they go on stage at 11 p.m. Well, they do it because they can, but if you don't get on the football field at 9 p.m., the football has started, the whistle has blown, and the match will last 90 minutes. So the point being, sport doesn't wait for an individual, that you have to be on time. So I think all of these guys have structure in their life and are reliable.
Thinking back about your first F1 race, are you able to replicate your thoughts, your emotions? What was going through your mind before going to that race?
Really, I've got to say sorry. It's 31 years ago. I have vague recollections of sitting in a press conference ahead of the Grand Prix with Sir Frank Williams being announced as the driver. Vaguely remember being in the pit, talking with the team. Vaguely remember the start of the Grand Prix. I didn't finish. There was a gearbox problem. But otherwise, not really. I'm not that sort of person that... I think I remember more from my childhood than I remember from my career, because in childhood you have less pressure, less expectation, and in career you are so structured and focused and under pressure that it's sometimes quite difficult to remember the details.
You have published several books. What's the main subject of the books? I mean, does it include, similar kind of memories from the past, or is it focused mostly on motivation and psychology?
Yeah, it's more about what I've learned from the business of sport and the business of Formula One. I've been very lucky that what I call the university of life, I've worked with people like Sir Frank Williams, like Ron Dennis, like, Christian Horner as my last team principal, Dietrich Mateschitz, Charles Vida, the owners of Red Bull. You learn a lot when you get to meet people who have got either ownership of a business. If I look at Mercedes-Benz, I had a relationship with them for many, many years. And I've met the CEOs over the years because they come to Grand Prix. Now, probably people within Mercedes have worked there for 20 years. I've never met the CEO because of the position they have within the company. So I realized as a sports person and a Formula One driver, you're given unique access to meet people that everyday life you wouldn't get the chance to meet. And the reassuring thing that I'm sure you have been told in many different scenarios, they're just people. They're successful people. They're driven. They have structure. They have belief systems. They have ways of dealing with people. It's sort of the books are about what I've learned from them and the similarities between all of these different people and how that comes together in sport and in business for the entertainment of the public. The big sports franchises now, whether it's soccer, whether it's Formula One, NFL has just been on with the Super Bowl. These are hugely profitable sports franchises.
That's a great direction to the conversation. I was just planning to ask you about Red Bull. What was their motivation to come and make their own team? Because previously, obviously, they were a sponsor. Then they decided to buy Jaguar. You were quite skeptic, moving initially to Jaguar. Later on, you had conversations to understand more about the ambition of Red Bull. What was happening back then? What is your observation of Red Bull and similar kind of stories and big brands going into Formula One or going into football, etc.?
Well, one thing that was quite clear with Red Bull, if you look since their inception, they use sport and alternative sports, let's say snowboarding, skateboarding, things like that, from an early stage. But as the company grew in its success, and Formula One was also part of their strategy with the Sauber team, with Gerhard Berger, I think in 1984, had the Red Bull bottle. And then they grew to the point where there was an opportunity to enter Formula One. So I think the key thing with Red Bull, largely speaking, is they prefer ownership of the franchise, and therefore they can control the imagery and the messaging that's coming from the company rather than being just a sponsor. So if you sponsor Manchester City Football Club, the owners of that club and the city and the fans have the voice and the direction of the club. You have your name on the football shirt. You hope they're going to be successful. So that promotes your company, but you have no real control unless you negotiate it into your contract. So I think that's the very clear and clever thing that Mr. Mateschitz and Red Bull have done over the years, where they own Formula One teams, they own soccer teams, they own ice hockey teams, and the list goes on.
Would you say perhaps that that's the most popular brand when it comes to owning sports entities?
I, off the top of my head, don't think of any other, let's say, the core of the company is relating to the sport that they then buy into. Red Bull is an energy drinks company. The product is, concept comes from Asia. The marketing comes from Austria. The distribution is global. And yet they own 2 Formula One teams, one in Italy, one in Britain. So Nike, I'm not aware of owning a sports team. Monster, I'm not aware of owning a sports team. Other companies that are in other core business, I'm not aware of them being owners. And maybe you can give me an example, but to me, it seems pretty unique.
Perhaps, I'm not sure about the ownership of Leverkusen, but there could be certain companies that are owned by corporations. It's just their name is not incorporated as part of the name of the football team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's many examples of wealthy individuals that own sports entities, but not in the way that they use it to promote the core brand of how they've made their business. Chelsea Football Club for many years was owned by the Russian entrepreneur who's
Abramovich,
Abramovich, yeah,
Roman.
but I don't remember him ever promoting how he made his money through this ownership. It was more like, Jim Ratcliffe, the Ineos owner, is one of the main shareholders in Manchester United. But I think of his name, I don't think of Ineos. I see Ineos on the Mercedes Formula One team.
Let's talk about the UAE and the Formula One and the Middle East. How do you assess the success that they have managed to do here when it comes to facilities for Formula One, investments, and the overall PR and the overall vibe in the region?
Well, I think that it can be considered a success story. If we go in Formula One terms, the first Grand Prix in the Middle East was Bahrain when I was still racing, I think 2003. It is now a well-established, enjoyed Grand Prix by Formula One. It doesn't have the big audiences that we would have at Silverstone or Monza and places like that, but it's bringing in international fans as well as created a fan base locally. Abu Dhabi is a state-of-the-art facility, which was, as I understand it, a sandbank island, and they've now created this hub of entertainment, hotels, racetrack, harbour, and it's a great experience to go to this Grand Prix. Saudi Arabia, of course, with the Jeddah racetrack. I'm going there for Formula E. I'll be there for Formula One. They have this state-of-the-art facility, Qiddiya, which is being developed and will be the home of the Grand Prix in the coming years. And the list goes on. I think that a number of the sports investments that have been made in the Middle East, of course, sometimes those who are negative will question the reasons behind these investments. But I don't want to live my life talking about the past and past differences of opinion. I think that sport should remain as non-political as is possible, because to say that sometimes there's not a political thought if it's a host nation that's creating the growth of a sport in a country. But sport is for all. Sport is for young, sport is for old, sport is for participants, sport is for viewers. There's very few things in the world that can bring the world together, and sport does that. And therefore, without getting into the rights and wrongs of any country, I think that anyone who's prepared to invest in a global sports entity is affecting change, because the sport comes with its own unique personality. It doesn't arrive in a country and adapt to the personality of the country. It comes as Formula One. Of course, we respect the local customs and traditions, but when you see the lights go out for a Grand Prix, this is Grand Prix racing. It doesn't matter if it's in the Middle East. It doesn't matter if it's Australia. It doesn't matter if it's South America, Europe. It's racing. And the sports stars and the teams do what they do best, which is go fast and try and win the event.
What happens when the race ends? There are a lot of parties going on. And when are Formula One drivers allowed to party?
Well, they're adults, so the truth is they can do what they want, but all of them are focused as well. They're athletes, and they may be Sunday night after Melbourne a reason to stay and party, but 4 days later they're in Shanghai in the paddock ahead of the next Grand Prix because it's back to back. So you always have to make a decision as to what it is you're prepared to sacrifice for the sake of a party. Now, I think you can party without the late night and the alcohol. And so, I think they're responsible guys. But I think if you're thinking party in terms of, day clubs, nightclubs, Ibiza, it's not like that. Because the guys that are at Ibiza doing day clubs and nightclubs are not winning Grand Prix.
From 1 to 10, Lewis Hamilton, party boy, how much?
I've actually not for decades ever been in a party scenario with Lewis, so I couldn't answer it. He's the most successful driver in every area bar World Championships, and he easily could have won more World Championships if fate had been different. So, yeah, I'm sure he knows how to party, but he knows how to win as well.
Okay, that's amazing, DC. So if there is anything else that I haven't asked you, you think our audience would be interested? Mostly we talked about psychology. We talked about the emotional aspects around Formula One and being a professional athlete. Anything else you would like to add?
Thank you for the question, but nothing that's coming to my mind right now. I'm happy to have had this conversation with you, and I remain, as I started out, a fan of sport, a fan of Formula One, and I'm looking forward to the year ahead.
Okay, that's excellent. We hope to welcome you in Dubai.
Yeah, I've been to Dubai many times. I've got friends who've moved there recently as well. Yeah, the development is very impressive to see. So, all the best.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye.